I would like to introduce with some words who they are. I'm going to start from Diana. Diana is the founding editor of Reboot FM. I'm a fan of it. I always go online and check what's in. I'm very glad that you have done this work. And as a cyberpunk in the 90s, she was active with netzkultur, net.art, nettime, and co-founded the Faces Eye mailing list in 1997. And she works at the crossroads of art, politics, gender, and technology. And thank you for joining us tonight. And Grada Kilomba, born in 1986 in Lisbon, and she's based in Berlin, luckily. And her work has been featured international everywhere. And the last two exhibitions are in Lisbon, still on. And we have the luck to have Grada since the last Herbstsalon 2015. She participated with a wonderful series of lecture of Kosmos Hoch 2, Kosmos Square, which she has interpreted in her own way, dealing with the knowledge, how we distribute the knowledge, with having the background of the Humboldt lectures, Cosmos, in our Sing Academy, which is now the Gorki Theater. So we have started with our collaboration with Grada, and we are continuing since then. And Grada is one of the artists who also has been joined the third Herbstsalon. Her work can be seen just outside, and we hear the drums also when we are a bit silent. And her work is outside, is the welcoming work, one of the welcoming works of Herbstsalon, the Desire Project. So it makes sense tonight that we talk about the desire. So I'm giving you the micro to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. So Grada, I would just shortly like to say, I know that most of you must know Grada Kilomba's work and her presence, but I think it's important to mention that you're a writer, a thinker, and an interdisciplinary artist. And I'm happy to know you for many years and count you as a friend, but I've also seen this progression in your work. And maybe if we start with the Desire Project, we won't speak too much about that because you can catch some online documentation about working with the project. And very well done, thank you. But maybe if we speak, let's just say shortly what it is, because for those, I think, for the people that haven't noticed or seen it yet, it is outside. And maybe let's start with the Desire Project was commissioned and shown at the Sao Paulo Biennale. And it was recently, congratulations, purchased by MAT, the Contemporary Art Organization in Lisbon, in Portugal. Congratulations. So, do you want to say a few words about the Desire Project?
About this project?
Yeah.
Well, this was actually, maybe I would like to say about why it is maybe outside, and because we spoke during the Cosmos number 10, I think we had, was dedicated to the making of the Desire Project right after the Biennale of São Paulo. So it was commissioned by the Biennale of São Paulo, and when I was invited to do a project, I wanted to do a project that speaks very much about desires, and the desire of coming to voice and having a voice and of being listened to. I think this silencing, listening, and speaking, these three dimensions are very, very present in most of my works. And I think there's an entity that has been very present in many of the works I've been doing, which is Anastasia, an enslaved woman that was forced to use a mask in order not to speak. And I think this woman really embodies also this triangulation between Europe, Africa, and Brazil. She was enslaved by the Portuguese. We don't know exactly her story, if she was born in the continent of Africa or if she was born in Brazil. But she was enslaved during the Portuguese slavery, and she became not only a political figure but also a religious figure. She came to represent all the ancestors that are related to the Orisha of Oshala, which is the Orisha, the god that represents our peace and the ancestors. So she's related to this Orisha, and she's worshipped in Candomblé and Umbanda. But she also has this political dimension of being a woman who spoke words of emancipation, like it was common, and rebellion, and for that it was very common to force enslaved people who had a critical voice to put a mask. So she appeared as an inspiration in many of my works, again and again. I remember being very small and having a little image of her in my portemonnaie, and I was carrying. And sometimes you don't know why you're carrying some images and the meaning of it. But she brings and calls up these questions of who can speak and who cannot, and what can we speak about, and what happens when we speak about certain things. And I like this parallelism that even though it's a figure that lived some centuries ago, not many centuries ago, but 2 centuries ago, but still brings very prominent questions for today, that we think that we can all think and we all have a voice, and that we can all build and construct our narratives, but we cannot. And this is still so prominent. And so I thought she should be the main character to develop this project of desire. And she also embodies this triangulation of Europe in relation to Africa, and the manifest of Europe and Africa in South America and the Americas. So this is how it came to be, this project.
Yeah, and I think, for me, one of the things that we spoke about earlier in earlier discussions was the way that a work like the Desire Project is seen and processed by different publics and in different spaces. And so, for example, like one of the White Cube, Sao Paulo is a different art space. It's a different physical, very specific geopolitical space. So even though the contemporary art world tends to be very white cube and white peopled, it's something that in Brazil there's a difference. It's a difference to having the work shown at Documenta or even at the Berlin Biennale. It's different publics. So here, and even if Gorki is a very, I think, unique space in terms of creating a culture that's unique in Berlin, in terms of dealing with topical issues, but in terms of working across lines and with lines of race, class, and gender. So thank you for Gorki. Putting this piece of work outside allows for a different engagement with different types of publics, and I think that was one of the reasons for you to put it outside.
I think so. It was this work is being shown now in 3 different cities. It's now in Fortaleza in Brazil. It just opened a week ago as part of the itinerary of the Biennale of São Paulo. So in Brazil, I know it's been really beautiful to show the work in Brazil, because the audience connects with the work very strongly. The work plays also, it's very digital, the video installation, but it has also a shrine that is dedicated to this woman, Anastasia, and with all the belongings that you worship, worship Oshala and also these ancestors. So it has candles and tobacco and coffee without sugar, and white flowers, and café sem açúcar, of course. And a glass of water. It has all these rituals. There's a ritual how to boil it and to whom and which flower is the lilians. You have a flower to these entities and so on. And when it is boiled and the installation is in Brazil, people really, and I have a mountain of candles, and people really go one by one and put a candle in front of the shrine and really pray and dedicate and read, and there's a story. And the whole constellation plays with this idea of memory and forgetting that I think is also very present in my work about this, that the theory of memory is indeed a theory of forgetting, that we cannot forget, we remember because we cannot forget. And we have the contrary a little bit in Europe, that we tend to forget because we don't want to remember history. And in this constellation, in this video installation, I play with the other way around, that actually when you have a history of colonization and slavery and oppression, you cannot forget. That's why you always remember, even if sometimes you would like not to remember, but you cannot forget it. And I like to play with this theory of forgetting and of memory very much. So you have to go through this part before entering. And when you come, then it happened that the work was shown in Cape Town in South Africa. And it was also quite amazing to show the work in the South again, and again in a country that have an enormous struggle for equality and for recognition. Is a country that experienced the brutality of apartheid until 1992 officially, so it's very present. It's something we cannot forget, and we don't want to forget. We want to remember and to work on it. So it has very people read it and go to the installation with much enthusiasm, and then now it was recently acquired by the MAT, the Museum of Art and Architecture and Technology, which is a beautiful museum. And again, it's a beautiful museum, and it's again a white cube. And it's also very important to bring elements that usually do not belong to the white cube, mm-hmm. and narratives that usually do not belong to the white cube, and interrupt them and transform them. And I like this element and I think this is one of the responsibilities as a thinker, as an artist, as a creator, that you need to interrupt spaces, mm-hmm. and challenge them. And then, because the work is being shown in Lisbon and in Fortaleza, I thought, if we show it here at the Herbstsalons. It was very beautiful because I came here to meet Sherman, and she was such a love. She was showing me all the palaces, all the rooms with the keys. We were walking around. This is a huge palace, and every room I saw, I said, I'm not feeling this. I'm not feeling this. I'm not feeling this. And we wanted to go to the other side, and I saw the boxes outside. And I said, that's here. It has to be here outside. Oh, really? Don't you want? No, it has to be outside. Sometimes you have to fill the spaces to know where to put. But I thought, since it has different homes also in these white cubes, mm-hmm. and in these museums, which is also very important, I would like to experiment. They have such a work outside, even risking that people might not see it, because mm-hmm. people go to the palaces, especially here in Germany. It's so cold and freezing, and people just go directly to the palace and leave the palaces. I don't know if they walk outside, but I think it's worth to risk and to play with the different messages that the work can give you in different spaces.
but I think it already gave such a nice acoustic space to arriving here because I heard it before I saw it. And it was like this hint of sound and like, what is that? And I think that's already, like, because there are also people passing by going just about their business, going home from work or whatever they're doing in this area, that they also will hear, they will already, for me it's like, because one of the things the work does is it, the voice of Anastasia is sort of made tangible, and that's also recalling the voice of resistance. And so even if people don't know what that sound is, they're being touched by a ghost, like a ghost from the future, that's also, you know, that's giving some, like there's a little magical quality of what it means to remember and what it means to remember not just oppression but resistance. Because that's, I think that's one of the things that I like especially about Anastasia and the story of her is that she's a strong, resistant figure, so that you cannot ignore the history of resistance that is always parallel to the history of like like enslaved Africans were never not resisting. So, and this is something which I think it's important to remember that resistance was always something that happened. Absolutely. So this is, I mean, we don't have that much time, and I wanted to maybe talk, because it's this for me is a nice way to move into like the solo exhibition that's on in Lisbon, and this is there too, and this is the one at the MAT, the Museum of Art and Architecture, and that's open. They're both open until the 5th of March in 2018, and the other, because I want to speak about this one first, Secrets to Tell, and the other is The Most Beautiful Language, which is at the National Gallery in India. Yeah? So one thing, because Secrets to Tell sort of speaks to this, that these are the secrets to tell, these histories that have been silenced, that were always kept alive, almost as if they were secrets. And in a way, like, is that, like, where are you going with the title of Secrets to Tell? And
yeah, Secrets to Tell came somehow, I don't know, I think sometimes things come without you knowing why, and later on, I think sometimes when you're working, the words come and whisper, the characters come and whisper in your ears, you know, and tell you which title and how it should be. And then it manifests itself, but sometimes it's not so clear why. When Matt contacted me, it was the solo exhibition was curated by Inês Grosso, who's a young female curator who was also in São Paulo and worked in Brazil for a long time and came back now to Lisbon. And I think what Matt is doing is very much to making a revolution in the contemporary art in Portugal somehow. Not only because they have this great architecture, which is a very it speaks a lot, but also the exhibitions that they have there. But also this step of buying works by black artists. Like it was the very first time that I was showing my work in the country where I was born. I'm working since 20 years, and I've been showing everywhere. And it is the very first time that I got an invitation to show the work in Portugal, in Lisbon. And I think museums like these also are defining a new agenda where they want to be, and that they want very much to be in the present or in the future. And most of the museums have an agenda that very much romanticizes and glorifies the past, and are going very much around the dominant narrative, dominant metaphors and languages and so on. So this is really very important, which artists have a platform to show work, and which artists have a platform to publish, and which artists have a platform to get a grant and money to produce new knowledge. And it's extremely difficult when you are not the normative body. Right, so it's very important when such big museums make such decisions, because they're also defining who can belong to the national canon. because black artists usually cannot belong to the national canon. We have this here in Germany with, for instance, Maya Him, who for many, many years was known all over the world, and people were teaching and lecturing her work at universities, at the Department of Literature, and in Germany nobody knew who Maya Him was. And the question is very much which bodies can indeed represent a nation and which bodies cannot. And most of the no-normative bodies are excluded from the platforms, are not to be seen at all, and also not granted to produce and commission it. So it's a very complex thing. I even forgot your question.
No, I think this is perfect, because I wanted to.
But it's just so important to talk about this as well.
Yeah. But I think this is partly where, like, in a way, this interdisciplinarity is important. And you've talked about how, like, you've worked in academia, you've published, you write, you do a lot of things. And one thing is challenging the canon. And in a way, that's as a black feminist, because I think it's important to use the F word, is that this is, once you challenge canons, it means, for example, I meet a lot of academics, and they are really, their sources are very limited. So the citations that they use are very limited. But once you start to be published, once you start to be legitimated by, like, having this position, having your works included in a collection, and so on, these things give your voice more strength. They also allow for other people, like academics, to use that, to cite that, but that also expands what that body of knowledge can be.
Absolutely. And I think very much we also defining. I realized that when I was doing all this process, it was a very, very intense process, doing these exhibitions in Lisbon. And before I went to Lisbon, I was shortly in Rotterdam. And I was at the Center of Art in Rotterdam. And I've met this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman, Gloria Wecker, who you should all read about. She just put a book out called White Innocence, and she's one of the first black authors writing about post-colonial studies, feminism, queer, etc. She just retired. So I don't know how old she is, it doesn't matter. It's also not so important. But just to say that she's working in this for many, many years. And she participated somehow indirectly at the Biennale of Venice to Holland to represent, with a text about the work of the artists representing Holland. And I was fascinated to meet her. When I go to Amsterdam or Rotterdam, we always call and I always try to meet. And she had this beautiful work about black intellectuals and artists that never received national recognition. And she talked about this national canon and about how we wield a canon of bodies and thoughts and representations and narratives that are allowed to represent a nation. And she had this work about this artist, this black artist in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, and so on, who made a major work and a major difference, but who were never recognized as part of Holland, of the Netherlands. And we have the same in all countries. And she really engaged me into this idea of what a national canon is, and how, and that was really like an alert moment for me when I realized, oh, I've been working since 20 years. I never showed my work in my own country, and that's so symptomatic. And we're talking exactly about a national canon. Or we are in Germany and we think in which platforms can we show the work and which artists can show the work and so on. But she alerted me to this national identity, this construction, this political construction of who can represent a nation. And that became very, 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 very awake for me, and it was just before I went to Lisbon. So it was all a process of, and I think from there comes the secrets to tell. That then goes around this work of the Desire Project that again speaks about many secrets, things that we should know but we don't know, and things that are kept quiet as secrets, knowledges that we should all have access to but we don't, etc. And that's where this old title came from. And then we built the whole installation exhibition around the work, this central work, but also around the architecture of the house.
I think this, because here's something where the secrets to tell is also like, it's how history, the rumor part of history, which is how histories are kept alive almost through rumors, almost through secrets, almost through whispered, like, did you know?
But it's not only secrets, it's not only whispers, it's also actually not represented at all. And sometimes I look at the work that I do and I always feel like I'm completing a puzzle, and I have a lot of different pieces on the table, and I think each project I turn a piece and I try to see where does this fit. And I think as a black woman there's a lot of pieces that I didn't have access to, and there's a lot of pieces that are missing, and a lot of pieces that do not have a name but should have. And it's really an immense and intense work. And I think the artistic work is really about putting together your own biography, social and historical and personal, but where you turn one piece after the other, and some pieces you cannot see yet, and so you just work with these pieces and you start putting them together and start naming them and start understanding what they are. But as more as you work, as more you realize that so little has been displayed to you, and there's a lot of pieces that were never really named, not only whispered, but also they were taken away.
I think this is important, because it's the willful forgetting, and this is the erasure of history, where things are not just avoided, but they are disappeared in the unpleasant moments in history that are like that exactly tell the other story to the architecture of the space outside and the statues. If you know Lisbon and you know something about the way that Portugal tends to heroicize what they call the discoveries, so which is the era of colonization, and then later the dictatorships that were there, and the anti-liberation movements, governments of Salazar and so on. So this is your work then, is it all those statues and all that architecture, not all, but that they're always about this other story that willfully ignores the exploitation, the slavery, the oppression, the violence of how those of that, the wealth that was generated to build those nice statues. So, and this is the environment that you're operating inside of Lisbon right now, right? This kind of, you're confronted with this history and these.
But it's quite exciting because maybe we can change to our computer. We didn't organize pictures; they are all Doshananda, but we will show some, maybe, if we manage. But what is really interesting? This is MAT. This is the museum where the new museum is here old, and this is the museum where the Desire Project was acquired, and it has it's central to the solo exhibition, and it's just in front of the water, and it was designed by female architecture, so it's a little bit like a womb. You almost do not realized that this building is there, and it goes inside as a womb, it goes inside into the dark, and in front of the river. So it has a very special architecture. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to install because you have round oval spaces, which I find very exciting and very beautiful to work with the oval space. Some years ago I was in Accra, in Ghana, and I had the honor of working at the Department of Performing Arts and Department of Music. And I've met this musician, a professor, who was explaining to me that that the African knowledge, the music is written in circles and circles. That, for instance, the European music is written on lines. You start here and you write and you end. You go to the next one, you write and you end, and you go to the next one and you write and you end. And the African music, it's circular. It goes into a spiral, and it's a circle. Then this circle keeps repeating, and then you add another circle, and then you add another circle. So the knowledge is circular, is not linear. It's a completely different concept of producing knowledge. It's not a beginning and the end. It's an infinite, continuous process, and I like that very much. And this is very much what is this space is about. Maybe we can just let. As I said, I think this is the very beginning of the making of. So I just let it run. We just put here 10 images or so, and then I can search for others. But this, along the river, it's a very problematic space because it's a space that is called Avenida de India. And Avenida de India is also the space where during the 40s they built all these fascist colonial monuments celebrating the expansion and celebrating the discoveries, like we say. There you are. And so it was very challenging. It was a little bit like when Shermin and Shala spoke with me and said, look, we have this idea of the cosmos. How do we deal with the legacy of a house, an architecture that has this legacy with colonialism, where Humboldt was celebrating his knowledge production after his colonial journeys? And how do we occupy this space anew? And then we put together this cosmos square or zwei. Oh, this doesn't belong here.
It belongs.
But it's about this very exciting of occupying, interrupting a space, interrupting a physical space, an architecture, and changing it, and this is Moses. This is Zé. Zé is the most wonderful. Moses did the music and all the production for and Zé did all the image mastering and the camera. It was I had really a great team. And Paula Nascimento, I don't know if she's here, did all the press, and João Rapazote. It was really great, wonderful people, very loving people. Here, Bruno did all the work with the words.
Grada, I'm going to speed you up.
Yeah, go on.
Because this is because I think. Do you want to spend more time on this? Because now I love actually the private life pictures just popping in there, because your work, of course, you don't leave your private life when you're working as an artist. But one thing I thought maybe this would be a moment to move to random after the sound.
I think that's a great thing.
And I would just like to request that all video devices be turned off now. This is, it's a demand more than a request. And this is, I will not speak about why. I think it's just out of respect for the artist's wishes. No visual recording shall be made in the next
Thank you, Random. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we still have to mention the book, Gummiband Familien, so rubber band families. And this is, I think maybe, Random, is it the best thing is that shall I pass it around? I will pass it around and ask you to please return it. Yeah, at the end, okay. So thank you for that. And yeah, please, I have to say that it was really a request from Random not to use images of this performance, so please don't. I recognize that some people might not have understood that. It's really a serious request, so please respect that. I would like to, maybe I think it's important just to take a moment and appreciate the ancestors and the grandmothers.
Yes, maybe it's interesting because first I want to say thank you again, Random. It means a lot to me that you came to this space. It means a lot to me also to be here and to be with you and with all of you, and also at the Berliner Herbstsalon with Chala and Shermin and all this work. It means a lot to create. There you are. Congratulations. It's so important to create these spaces. And it really goes all together to what we've been talking about this importance of creating platforms and alternative platforms. And it's not by chance that the title is Disintegrate Yourselves, and to question what is integration and this obligation means. That's why we chose the title Desire instead, because we are caught into this dynamic of what we have to be and what we cannot be and what we should be, and sometimes we forget this question of who am I and what do I want to be, and that's why we end up with the title Desire, to speak about what we want. And sometimes we are so caught into these dominant narratives, and in response to these dominant narratives, that we hardly have time and space to create our own narratives, which are the desires. So I think Random's work just comes perfect here, and I'm really happy. And it's the ancestors. We're looking at the beginning. I didn't prepare. We have thousands of images that I didn't have the chance to sort out yet. But both exhibitions are placed in the same avenue, which it was an avenue that in Portugal was used to celebrate the colonial time during and the Portuguese imperialism in the 40s, in a time that Franco in Spain was in power, Salazar in Portugal, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy. There was all this vague of fascism and this celebration and reassurance of the colonial time. So they built all this Padrão dos Descobrimentos and Torre de Belém, all these places, some platforms to celebrate all the colonies, all the countries that speak Portuguese, and etc. And for me, it became very important and very relevant because it was the very first time after so many years working that I showed my work there. And I decided to title the solo exhibition as The Most Beautiful Language. And it has an ironical tone on it. While I've been working around internationally, when I say that I'm Portuguese, or if people know that I'm Portuguese, they always come and say, "Oh, Portuguese is the most beautiful language. It's so beautiful," and that hates me. That goes on my nerves until the end.
I'm sorry.
And people always say that, and I wanted to play with these colonial fantasies of superiority that come out in a very romanticized and almost sexualized way, and that Portugal has created its colonial discourse very much at this level, and that we tend to forget how many other languages were silenced and erased in order to have this most beautiful language. Hundreds and hundreds of languages were erased. We're talking about 3 different continents, from Asia, Africa, and America, that everybody in all these different countries speak Portuguese, and we always count very proudly how many countries speak Portuguese without asking ourselves, how did that happen, that millions of people lost their language. We all have the same names. Doesn't matter if you're in Brazil, if you're in Angola, or Mozambique, or Guinea-Bissau, or Timor-Leste, or Goa. We all have the same names without asking ourselves, how did that happen, that millions of people lost their own names, that we are all called Ferreira and Fernandes and etc. Where does this come from? You know, and this narrative that is so glorified and so romanticized of what the colonial time was, which is actually a time of genocide, of exclusion, of erasure, of dehumanization. But the story is told with a narrative, with a language that is incoherent with the reality. And I think that's also why it's so urgent to create platforms like this, because it's so urgent to create platforms where you develop new languages, being graphical, but also metaphorical and visual. We need to create new languages and visual languages and create new associations that people have not done yet. That's why I think then art plays and literature plays such an important role in the construction, in the decolonization, because you create a language and a vocabulary and a visuality that was not there before. And in these works, in these 2 exhibitions, 2 works that come, I always work with earth. Mm-hmm. And this earth makes this connection with these ghosts, with this past, and the ancestors, to go back to what you were asking.
It also it gives another element because it has an aroma, and it gives you a different relationship to, like, it's the same thing with being outside here, is that you bring the outside inside with the earth, but it gives you a different, like, smell is one of the most vibrant sensory that recalls memory. Smells are very important for like recalling memory. But something I think, like what you just described for me, is maybe this whole point of not integration of culture, but disintegration of culture, because all of the things you're talking about are like what constitutes culture and who constitutes culture. And these are things where it's like integration for me is always, it's more like it's better to understand that culture is changing and that culture should disintegrate and then rebuild itself. And that's sort of like a natural process of like where leaves fall and then, the tree, as they are now, they get colored and then they change and then they're naked and then it's spring and they get green and blossoming. Like this sort of, like every year you have a disintegration of things and something new can come out of that. But I think this is where, for me, it's because what you're talking about is how to recreate and redefine what constitutes culture. And that's culture in general. It's culture in terms of like weirdly national spaces, in terms of geographic spaces, and understanding all of the different things that go into the production of a culture. And this is like being active there, but also being able to claim that space and that it does mean to, it's not just about becoming part of a canon, it's about becoming part of a body of knowledge and a body of like productive ideas that also, like, I think right now it's very urgent, I think, because one thing is that what I keep thinking about now is that, like, there were these eras of fascism, and we're living in one of them now, which is horrible. And one of the things that culture can do is provide other forms of expression, but other sets of knowledge and other ways to, like, imagine a different world. And we do, like, there are right-wing regimes and fascist regimes on all continents right now that are, like, very dangerous to not just our present, but our future. So I would like you to speak to that, actually. And because this is, when you're talking about the most beautiful language in a deconstruction, creating new narratives is not, it's not just an artistic project, it's a project for like allowing spaces to open up to change.
No, it's not only an artistic project, but I think through arts, you have this possibility to transform language indeed for a very simple reason, because all this fascist discourse and the colonial discourse and racist discourse itself, it's something discursive. It's something that is built through discourse, through an association of words and images. Mm-hmm. This is how the colonial, the discourse of oppression works. It works not because it's logical, not because it's believable, but becomes believable and credible because it makes an association between words and images, which are not logical, but they become associative and they become equivalent, and therefore they become believed. Mm-hmm. So it is in the construction of images and words that you actually build a discourse. And this is exactly what you do in the arts. You create, you can create new visualities, and you can create new words, and you can work exactly with new associations that were not there before. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly how you can become so transformative when you do that kind of work. That's why, for instance, I worked for many, many years in academia, but in academia you're always producing answers and giving answers that do not necessarily question. You're making a nod. It's time to finish. Yeah. No. Okay. And but it's very much, and this is also why what is so interesting to work with art, being in the theater, in performance, or in the literature, or in contemporary art, is that you have a certain freedom to exploit new visualities in a different epistemology. And you can create new languages and new associations that were not there before. And you give this aha effect. And this is what I find so powerful, is that you can create a work that do not necessarily give answers, mm-hmm. but does something much more important. The artistic work creates questions. And I think it is when you yourself produce a question, when you enter a transformative process, when the question comes from within you, from an insight, when you see something and you go out and you say, well, I never thought about that. And that's what it means. And this is really transformative. And this is what you can do when you create platforms like this one, like the Berliner Herbstsalon, and you create all this incredible group exhibition with all these international artists, and each one brings, through a composition of works and through visuality or sound, not necessarily giving you an answer, but creating a visuality that prompts questions within you that were not there before. And I think this is when you really start transforming society. When you give answers, there's always this Machtkampf, this power game of saying, weiß ich nicht. I don't know. I don't know if I believe it. Yeah. But when the questions raised from within you, I think this is really transformative in that sense.
This, I think it's because I just came from some other discussions, like with Hito and Wendy Chun, and they were talking about basically the data collection and how it's the algorithmic culture, and these are things, how you produce things that make it seem normal, and then how do you get denormalized? Like, in a way, how do people get into a state where they can already start to ask questions? Where do people get a sort of critical perspective? Because the type of perspective that you get based on what you think you know is what allows you to ask which questions you ask. So I think I'm just saying what you said in a more weird way, but understanding that language has a lot, like words have power and meaning. Sometimes we need to get the words back. Sometimes we need to, I like to use the word feminism now because I think it's important to be a feminist today, but I mainly think it's important to act and understand that everything we do is informed by a lot of sets of politics. So that whether you're in art or not, and it's very important because there are children that are growing up, and we have to offer them something for the future, and that's like, so that's, eventually those children are going to need those words to mean something, but they're also going to need for the world to have meanings that they can relate to, that they can dream on, that they can think of some kind of way to be in the world in a better way. And I think this is where it's like, for me, it's not just about being positive, because it's that you need to be critical in order to even begin to imagine what's to be done to make things better.
But I think there's also another dimension. That's why the title, The Most Beautiful Language, is also this playing or mocking, making fun of these whole beliefs that some European countries have the most beautiful language. But also, it's also about speaking about the urgency of creating new languages, and how important it is to create new languages also, and to create hybrid languages. And that also to understand, it doesn't matter in which area it is, but to understand how important it is to work interdisciplinary, that you cannot narrate reality anymore using one discipline. I'm not interested in doing theater or film or performance or video installation. I want to tell stories, and I think each story wants to be told differently, and as an artist, you have to listen how the story wants to be told, and the story tells you how it wants to be told. It wants to be danced, or wants to be told as a storyteller, wants to be in an installation with objects. The story tells you how it wants to be told, and I think it's very important to create these new languages and multiple formats, and it's also important to understand that most of the people who produce knowledge and art didn't have access, were denied access to most of the institutions. Mm-hmm. So, of course, when I enter these institutions, I'm not going to tell the story that I want to tell with the same narrative and the same disciplines as the classic, as they have this tradition of excluding me and silencing me. I cannot use classical disciplines to tell a feminist project, mm-hmm. or post-colonial project or queer project, because there's no language that I can use to tell that. It needs to be hybrid. And I think a lot of thinkers and artists, even mm-hmm. much before us, taught us that their work is very hybrid. They don't know where to place it, because it has so many different disciplines at the same time. And it's hard to know where to put it. And I think when you do that, that's when the work becomes really fascinating. For this exhibition, The Most Beautiful Language, I worked mostly with two people, with Moses. Leo did the creative production and the music and the acting. Zé, the Paiva as well, did the camera and the mastering. And the curator was Gabi Ngobo. Gabi Ngobo was my curator already at the Biennale of São Paulo. And she wrote his most beautiful text that I've read. It's a beautiful text. It's coming out very, very soon, the catalogue for this exhibition. And she's going to be the curator for next year, 2018, of the Biennale Berlin. And so she was traveling around, and she was in Zimbabwe. Before we had to end up the deadline. We had the deadline for the text for the catalogue. And she was at the National Museum of Zimbabwe in Harar. And it was presented to her a letter from a lady called Mrs. Brown, who wrote a letter to the museum director in the 50s, 60s. And then she wrote this beautiful text about this letter of this Mrs. Brown, who wrote a letter during the time of colonialism, when Zimbabwe was actually called Rhodesia and was colonized by the British. And she was a lover of arts. She loved arts. She was British, and she was during the colonial time living there. And she wrote a letter of complaint to the director of the museum, saying that she's absolutely amazed with the quality of the works coming from Europe to a country like Zimbabwe and being exposed in such a noble place. But she's deeply disturbed with the workers that work at this space. And she referred to them as the Africans. This place is being guarded by the Africans who work in this museum. And what I found most disturbing when I was visiting your museum is that the Africans were speaking in their own language, Shona. And I write you to forbid these men of speaking their language that is not appropriated in a space of art. They should speak only in English, or they should not speak at all. So she uses this letter as a base to introduce the exhibition that we created in Lisbon, The Most Beautiful Language, and these colonial fantasies of the superior languages and the erasure of other languages that are not superior enough to be spoken. But also this idea of what and how and which languages and which formats, also visual, artistic languages, can have place in a space of art. How should art be looked like, and how should be experienced? And then she goes from this letter and explains and decodes all these levels of language and which languages have a space, and the urgency to create new languages and to have new tongues. And I find that really, really beautiful. When it comes out, I will let you know. I will put it somewhere in the...
It will go in the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's so beautiful. And it talks exactly to that. The urgency of creating new languages and narratives that otherwise are not there. And to create these platforms with this political agenda. It's very, very important.
I mean, unfortunately, I think it's a wonderful note to end on, but we are out of time here. And I want to thank you.
I want to thank you. And I want to thank all of you. Yeah. And I want to thank the Gorki for this great work. Thank you so much.
And of course, Random, thank you so much for sharing and your pain and your beauty. And I do want to end on another note. There's so much hate speech in the world that maybe it's time for love speech.
So thank you, Grada and Diana, for this inspiring talk. So at 7:30, there is a theater play in our Maxim Gorki Theater on the left side, Get Deutsch or Try Dying. So, and the third Berliner Herbstsalon continues till the end of the weekend. And we are open till 11 o'clock p.m. So please use the time to see